Chapter 27. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was that I was no longer on a boat. I was lying on the ground surrounded by green. Lots of green. The second thing I noticed was that I was alone. I slowly sat up. My head was still spinning and I felt nauseous. I looked around, spotted a nearby tree, and crawled over to sit against it. As the nausea faded, the anxiety set in. Where am I? How did I get here? Where is everyone else? Hello? I called out softly. I didn't know who or what was out there, but I also didn't know how to tell if anyone was nearby without alerting potential enemies or aggressive animals. My voice was absorbed by all the foliage around me. I mustered the courage to call out again. Hello? Is anyone there? The sound went a little further, but there was still no answer. I looked around again, fighting the overwhelming urge to panic, and tried to think. Are you injured? I did a quick mental check on my body, feeling inordinately relieved when I was still able to move my legs, and took several deep breaths to fight off the obviously unnecessary terror that had filled my mind for a moment. I had crawled to the tree just fine. Of course my legs were working. Okay, next. Would a phone call work at all here? Did I even bring my phone on the cruise? I frantically checked my pockets. No phone. No watch either, so I didn't know what time it was. No food. No water. Definitely no compass. I had no idea where I was. How would I get back home? The river. If I follow the river, I'll make it to civilization eventually, I mumbled to myself. I recalled what the captain had said just before I blacked out. There were also communication stations along the waterway, so I could call for help if I didn't find a city first. Are there cities on the Fuero? I looked around, listened intently, and realized the first problem with my plan. I couldn't see or hear any running water. So I had to make my way blindly through the jungle and find the river. Then I could figure out which way to go to get back to civilization. No problem. Right. I stood and scanned my surroundings again. I didn't see any obvious trails in any direction. I looked up, trying to gauge the location of the sun. The canopy was a solid mesh of branches and leaves. There was no sun to see, and all the shadows blended into each other with none to point me in any direction. With nothing else to try, I gathered my courage, picked the way that looked least overgrown, and started forward. Almost immediately, I was assaulted with the image of a jaguar leaping through the foliage at me. I screamed and backed up several steps, tripping over a rock or a root, and landing on the ground. Panicking, I looked for the large cat, but there was nothing there. I tried to think as I let my heart rate slow down. It seemed like a precognition, but it was day, and there was no attacking cat. I'm also in the Amazon, I reminded myself. Somewhere magic works both night and day. But precogs only saw what was guaranteed to happen. Except this time, apparently. Maybe something about the always magicness of the Amazon made talents act differently? I tried to imagine what Aaron would say. He'd be all logical and technical about the situation, I was sure. Oh God, Aaron. What would Aaron think if I didn't check in like I usually did? He'd just lost his sister. Would he think he'd lost me too? Would the school tell him I was missing since he was my emergency contact? And what were Tiffany and Leona thinking? What happened on the boat? I knew I was lost. I didn't know how lost or how long it would be before I would find someone. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious. I looked up again. Overnight, at least. It was definitely not closing in on sunset, which was when the boat had stopped working. It could be days before I could tell anyone I was okay, or even still alive. And what would I say? What could I say? I didn't know how I ended up in the middle of the jungle. My thoughts chased themselves in circles while I sat unmoving, unsure of what to do. The precognition had frozen my body and sent my mind into overdrive. I felt like I had no control over anything at the moment, and continued fighting the desire to just lay down, curl into a ball, and never get back up again. Instead, I stood up, braced myself, looked around, and started walking in another direction. I saw a river flowing past me, wide and deep and dark. I blinked my eyes and was back where I'd woken up. I looked around, then took a step in a new direction. Nothing. The fourth direction? Another nothing. A deep breath as I stepped in the direction of the river vision again. I saw the water meandering through the trees of the jungle once more. On high alert, I walked in the direction of the river. I didn't get a vision with every step, but whenever I got worried that I'd wandered off the path, I'd turn a circle, taking a step at every cardinal-ish direction. Usually there was nothing, though sometimes I would see a snake or a pitfall, and I would hurriedly turn away. Once I saw a waterfall flowing over a cliff, but I was pretty sure the Fioro Santa Maria didn't have any waterfalls, so I continued heading towards the large river I had first seen. After what felt like several hours, I reached a clearing on the edge of a drop-off. I could hear running water below me, and I looked down at the river. And down, and down. I was standing on a cliff, the height of which I couldn't even begin to guess. Far below, the river looked almost exactly as I'd seen it in my precogs. It was flowing from my right to my left, which meant I was on the north side of the river. It was too big to be a tributary, so the river had to be flowing east. I turned and walked to my left. I got no precognitions that it was either the correct or incorrect way to travel. I turned around and tried heading upstream. Nothing happened. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain, and realized I'd been relying on my second sight to get me through far more than I'd realized. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Something emerged and disappeared in the water. Many somethings. I looked closer. Are those pink dolphins? I blinked, sure I was imagining things, but the dolphins didn't disappear. A word popped into my head. Iara. No, the Iara was a mermaid. The pink dolphins of the Amazon River were called Boto. I nodded to myself, pleased that I remembered something from my lessons, before realizing what I'd just noted. The Boto lived in the Amazon River, not the Fioro Santa Maria. The Amazon was miles north of the Fioro. I was on the wrong side of the Amazon rainforest. There weren't going to be any communication stations. I didn't even know the name of a major city on the Amazon River, much less where one could possibly be. I collapsed to the ground and stared blankly at the river over the edge of the cliff. No food, no water, no way to contact anyone. And my precognitions had stopped, so I didn't know if there were any dangers around me. I was suddenly so overwhelmed by the hopelessness of it all, I didn't know how to even be sad or worried. The sounds of the rainforest softly filled the air around me. Think, I told myself. What do you know? What can you do? I remembered the guided tour I'd just been on. Christina had been extremely knowledgeable. I tried to remember what she told us about which plants were poisonous and which were edible, which animals were dangerous, which climbed trees, and which stayed on the ground. Breathe. Think. Staying where I was certainly wasn't going to get me anywhere except the edge of a cliff in the dark. My best and probably only way of finding a way home was to keep walking. Follow the river, watch the tree line for any plants Christina said were safe to eat, and hope to find some source of cleanish water to drink. If the animals can drink it, I probably can too, right? And hope that my precog would kick in again soon. I didn't know the rules of when it did and didn't show me anything, but I could hope that it would give me something useful, couldn't I? I slowly got to my feet and began walking in the clearing along the canyon's edge again. My senses were on high alert, and I jumped at every unfamiliar sound around me, but I kept walking. Gotta keep moving. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. The only other option is to lay down and give up, and I'm not ready to give up. I kept repeating the words to myself until they became a mantra. The sun began dropping to my left and just behind me. When it was about halfway down, storm clouds started rolling in. Shit, I murmured and glanced around. The cliffside had gradually dropped until I was walking at the same level as the river. The jungle was still overgrown and forbidding, and getting darker by the minute as the sun disappeared behind the clouds. When the first raindrops fell, I knew I had to make a decision. Stay in the open and get soaked, or go for cover and risk whatever was watching me from the bushes. As the sprinkles became a downpour, I made up my mind and dashed for the trees. It wasn't a far dash. The shoreline was only a dozen feet wide. Once under cover, I stopped to think. My anxiety had decreased some in the previous hours, and I was able to put together coherent thoughts easier than when I had woken up. Sitting still until the rain stopped was not an option. It could rain for hours or days straight. It was called a rainforest for a reason. I was going to get soggy walking at the tree's perimeter, but going deeper into the woods was out of the question. Beside me, a fern with leaves 3 feet long and a foot wide grew out of the ground. Inspiration struck. I pulled off one of the fronds and held it over my head. Slowly, I stepped out of my meager cover and into what had become a downpour. The leaf protected me a little, but not enough, and I jumped back under cover. "Fine," I muttered to myself. "We'll just walk under the edge here, then." I continued to follow the river until it became too dark to see in front of me. There were no stars or moon to light the way. It was very, very dark. I fumbled my way into the foliage a little, reaching out blindly with a hand until it ran into a tree. I turned my impromptu umbrella upside down, laid it on the ground, and sat down on the vaguely dry surface, my back against the tree. No meds, I thought sullenly. Not that I'd want to be taking sleeping meds anyway. I didn't think I'd be able to sleep with anything less than anesthesia, or maybe whatever had knocked me out in the boat. Though I had managed to find some berries to eat and caught raindrops to quench my immediate thirst, I was hungry and thirsty. I was also exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally, but I couldn't sleep. It was a very long night. If the unknown sounds in the day startled me, every sound in the dark was 10 times worse. My imagination filled in the unknown and unseen with images of jaguars and giant spiders and 50-foot-long anaconda snakes.